What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Justin Lorber, also known as Future Dodgers, and we're here to talk Cody Bellinger. Are there alternatives to Cody Bellinger? Is Cody Bellinger the guy that we want to see in these last 25 games remaining? To catch you up on the story, A.J. Pollock was the guy that was expected to start eating into Cody Bellinger's time. He was going to become a platoon player. Well, A.J. Pollock goes down, out for a minimum of 2 weeks, probably closer to 3, which means Cody Bellinger is back to an everyday player. Justin, I'm looking at his numbers. Over the last 3 weeks, since August 16th, Cody Bellinger has an OPS of 230. He has a negative 38 weighted runs created plus. I didn't know that statistic could go negative. Over that stretch, he has a 26% strikeout rate and a 1.5% walk rate. Those numbers are slightly worse than his season numbers, but not a whole lot. So I'll ask you the very obvious, the very big question. Where are you at on Cody Bellinger with 25 games remaining this season?
Based on what I see online, probably not as negative as most. I think what he can provide defensively in center field and what that does, kind of shifting down the line and make sure Mookie's in right, Chris Taylor or A.J. Pollock is in left. That's one of the best defensive outfields in baseball, probably arguably top 5, top 3. And I think that does a lot. So he's kind of been a black hole on offense. But I don't think he would get as much focus if the Dodgers offense had been performing up to expectations. We've got a lot of guys just not hitting right now like they should. This is basically an all-star 1 through 8 lineup, 1 through 7 if you're just assuming Bellinger is kind of a moot point. Those guys haven't been playing like that over the last 3 to 4 weeks. If they don't end up hitting in the postseason like they should, Cody Bellinger being a black hole in the 8 hole isn't going to matter a whole lot.
Yeah, and I hear you. The defense thing I think is important, and it's indisputable, right, how good he is defensively. Let me ask you this question when it comes to Bellinger. I laugh every time, once a week, Dave Roberts talks about the at-bat quality with Cody Bellinger and how the approach is there and blah. Do you see a high level at-bat quality? Do you see, are there any building blocks for you this far into a season? Because we're not talking about a small sample size. Is there anything that you've seen over the last week, the last 3 weeks, the last 2 months that leads you to believe that somehow this is going to tick up at some point in a meaningful way? Not like, oh, he's going to hit 150 now instead of 100, but can he get to 230? Is that a reasonable expectation from here on out?
At this point, I would probably lean no. I think this is likely an off-season thing. And there's a lot going on with him. He had the off-season shoulder surgery, so he wasn't, getting hitting reps in the off-season. He wasn't working out, which I think you can see physically. He doesn't look, if you look at pictures of him in 2019, he was just ripped. He looks like a guy who didn't really work out much in the offseason, that he couldn't because he was recovering from shoulder surgery. He gets hurt just a few games into the season, misses a couple months, so he doesn't have those reps there. And now he comes back. He doesn't have the strength. He doesn't have the reps. He's still, getting back into it, as we've seen with a lot of guys. When they have shoulder surgery, the first year back can be rough. It can be rough with power hitters specifically, but it can be rough overall. And he's experiencing that right now. So I think this is almost certainly going to be an off-season fix thing. Right now, this is kind of just what he is. Maybe it ticks up a little bit just because it's
random,
hard to go lower. But yeah, I think that, people can try to read into the psychology. I had a couple of friends tell me in a fantasy football draft a couple of days ago that they thought, it was his girlfriend being pregnant. That was the distraction. That's very easy for them to say because you cannot disprove it. Even if he came out and said, oh, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
You can't disprove that at all. So I think it's a combination of things physically, and obviously some mental because, he just hasn't been hitting well, and that can eat away at a hitter. I don't think it's going to get much better.
Yeah. Just to clarify, those sirens not coming for you, Justin, right? That's correct. We're safe here for a few more minutes.
I'll let you know if they get closer. I'll go lock my door.
Perfect. Yeah, the thing about Bellinger that's fascinating to me is he's never struck me as a guy that I loved the approach at the plate. It almost felt like a guy who the raw tools and the raw athleticism and the raw power overcame the fact that he seemed to just tweak his swing just randomly and believe, so when that athleticism and when the sort of the groove disappears, then the lack of approach, I wonder if that becomes magnified. So the question then we'll move to is the big one of, is there an alternative? Like, we're all sitting here complaining about Cody Bellinger being an everyday guy. We love the defense, but, I would say the offense is so bad that I don't think those two even come close to evening themselves out. Again, this is a guy who's got a negative 38 weighted runs created plus over the last 3 weeks or so. 100 is league average. Again, he's negative 38. So that's how bad it's been. On the season, he's 51. So he's 49% worse than league average. You could look at any OPS number, weighted runs created. He's one of the worst, top 5 or 6 worst hitters in all of baseball this season. So the question then is, what are the alternatives? So I'll throw some names and numbers at you, Justin. You tell me on this list if any of these guys are interesting to you or guys that you would place above or below Bellinger at this point. We can go maybe individually here. We'll start with the guy who's been the closest to an alternative, which is everybody's favorite Dodger, Billy McKinney. This is a guy who has an on-base percentage of 287, a slugging percentage of 244 in 94 plate appearances. He has just 1 home run. He's striking out a tad under 25% of the time. The number that's most encouraging for McKinney is the 15% walk rate. So we know the defense there of the guys that I'm about to mention, probably the best defender. Do you have a take on Billy McKinney? Do you see what Andrew Friedman and company apparently see in Billy McKinney?
Max Bay, who some people might know as Choice Fielder on Twitter, has thought for a while, and he's made these thoughts public, that the Dodgers front office actually really likes Billy McKinney. They like the batted ball profile. They like the plate discipline, solid defense in an outfield corner. He hasn't hit super well. Probably not the worst option. And we'll get to this, but I think if I were rolling out a Game 1 NLDS lineup tomorrow without AJ Pollock, Cody Bellinger would be in center, but that's me.
Okay, so let me throw some minor league guys at you, and then we'll get to some of the more major league-ish. So some other guys we've seen this year. Sheldon Noisy, 66 plate appearances at the major league level, an on-base percentage of 182. He does have 3 home runs. He struck out 40% of the time at the major league level with a 1.5% walk rate. He has been better at AAA, unsurprisingly. He's got an OPS of about 750 and 2 home runs over the last month. So Noisy is one guy. Luke Raley is another. Again, OPS under 500 at the major league level, a high strikeout rate, a low walk rate. He's been crushing it at AAA over the last 30 days. He's got an OPS over 1,000 in 44 at-bats. Zack Rex, another one. I didn't even remember he had made it up to the major league level. Maybe that's because he was 0 for 10 with 7 strikeouts. You mentioned to me offline he had some rough pitching matchups. Again, another guy that's doing well at AAA, an 850 OPS with 5 home runs over the last month. Some of the major, and Steven Souza Jr., who is in this in-between category because right before you and I came on to record this, news broke that he's being added to the 40-man roster. Souza had 28 plate appearances at the major league level, a 160 batting average, 250 on base, 360 slugging, 1 home run, 36% strikeout rate, 7% walk rate. The AAA number is not a whole lot better. The 389 on base looks good, but of those guys, Noisy, Raley, Rex, and Souza, how do you feel about that group before we get to the Beatty, McKinstry, and Luck crowd?
I think Souza's the most interesting of those guys, just because he can play the outfield, he can hit lefties. It's tough right now to put Albert Pujols in a lineup that doesn't take out a regular because they said they don't want to put Trey in the outfield. Max Muncy's got to play second or third. Corey Seager's not moving to the outfield. So without the DH right now, it's tough to get Pujols in a starting lineup. So against lefties, if you really want to get, a more offensive lineup in there, Souza's probably the guy to do that, at least while Pollock is out.
He felt like a guy that when he was up, I felt like at least we were getting major league quality at bats. I mean, again, I know the numbers weren't great, but, a 250 on base and a 360 slug is not very good, but compared to what we're seeing, I'm curious your take on Raley. I mean, Raley's a guy, he goes back down to AAA, and he's got an OPS over 1,000 over the last month. The major league numbers weren't good, but again, a 246 on base percentage is about 100 points higher than Bellinger. So what's your take on Raley and or Rex?
Honestly, Raley's on the IL right now. There's a COVID situation in Oklahoma City, so Not sure if it's that. Minor league injured lists don't typically list a reason for why they're on the injured list. So it could be something else. It also could be that. We know he was put on the 60-day injured list to make room for those 2 pitchers that they acquired from the Cubs last week. But that has typically been the protocol when guys do go on the COVID IL. So either his season is over or he's on the COVID IL, in which case we have no idea when he would be available. Rex is interesting to me. I think he's a little more of a contact guy than Raleigh would be. Like you said, 10 at-bats. His debut was against Yu Darvish. I don't remember what his second start was, but I know it was against another top-level pitcher. I just can't remember who. I would be interested in seeing, what he could do for maybe 20 or 30 at-bats. But unfortunately, you're at a point right now in September where, you really need to figure out what you're heading into the playoff roster with. And if A.J. Pollock isn't going to be ready, you really need to figure out, okay, well, who are we going to give that last 1 or 2 spots to in case we need to pinch hit for Bellinger or if his offense just really becomes untenable to put in a starting position.
Okay, last group I'll throw at you. This is the Beatty, McKinstry, Luck crew. This is the sort of major league, fringe major league. I believe McKinstry was the guy who got sent down for Souza today, so he's in the minor leagues. Beatty and Lux are in the minor leagues as well. McKinstry on the season, 215 batting average, 263 on base, 405 slugging percentage, not a great strikeout percentage, not a great walk percentage, does have 7 home runs. We know Gavin Lux, on base percentage of 302, which again, that's not very good, but in the context of guys we're talking about, man, I would kill for a 302 on base percentage from the number 8 hole. He does have a 10% walk rate and a slightly lower strikeout rate, so Lux was at least putting the ball in play. And he has gone down to AAA over the last month. He's got a 740 OPS and 55 at-bats. The last one is Beatty, and I'll be honest, I said to you before, I am not the high guy on Matt Beatty. I've been like, he probably shouldn't make the opening day roster guy on Matt Beatty. But I look at the numbers this year. Matt Beatty, at the major league level, has a 358 on-base percentage. The 374 slug is not great, but 18% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate, by far the best sort of gap between those two numbers of anybody we're talking about. Matt Beatty has a weighted runs created plus of 108. He is an above-average major league outfielder. He's gone down to AAA, and what has he done? He has an OPS of 1,000 over the month, which is about 25 at-bats in his case, while hitting 400. So Beatty, McKinstry, Lux, talk me through how you process this, because to me, when I'm not high on Beatty, but when I look at the numbers, the gap between him and Bellinger, and again, he's got 215 plate appearances, seems massive to me.
I think you do have to look at it from an overall production standpoint. You mentioned the 108 weighted runs created plus. So he's been slightly above league average from an offensive perspective. That's in 215 at-bats, but just half a win on Fangraph's version of WAR. And that's because he doesn't really give much defensively. You put him in an outfield corner, but he's not going to be a plus defender there. And so I think you have to take a holistic view of the overall production. And also remember that, if A.J. Pollock doesn't come back, everything you're dealing with in a playoff setting is a small sample. Yeah. So Matt Beatty might be hitting 400 at AAA. He might have a 108 weighted runs created plus this year in the majors. But that doesn't mean he'll do much in a short sample. He could hit 500 in a 5-game NLDS, but he could also hit 100. So I think it goes back to my point that none of those guys are going to save the Dodgers offense. Yeah. The Dodgers offense has been underperforming basically across the board, aside from, 2 or 3 guys. And if they continue hitting like that, they're not going to win the World Series. It doesn't matter if Cody Bellinger hits. It doesn't matter if Matt Beatty's in the lineup and he hits. It doesn't matter if A.J. Pollock comes back and he hits. They need their offensive stars, and that's basically their entire lineup, to perform like stars, or at least most of them to perform like stars in order to have a chance to win the World Series. And, I think with that perspective, and of course that's my perspective and it doesn't have to be everyone's, I think you maximize the defensive value that Bellinger brings. You have Bellinger in center, Betts in right, Taylor or Pollock in left, and you have a good defense, not just in the outfield, but also hopefully in the infield with Trey getting more comfortable at second base. Yeah. And you hope that the guys who are supposed to hit, because they've hit basically the whole year, actually end up hitting. And again, this seems like a minority view because people are just really frustrated watching Bellinger at bats. And I resonate with that because he hasn't been putting up competitive at bats. And a guy like Matt Beatty, he might not hit 400, but he's going to put up competitive at bats. And it's more aesthetically pleasing to watch and to see, and it makes you feel better if he goes back to the dugout with a strikeout that he made the guy work for 7 or 8 pitches.
Yeah, no, it's such a fascinating thing, and it's funny to be on this side of it. I remember watching the Padres and seeing them trot out Austin Hedges as their catcher every week and every day, and I was like, my goodness, like he is historically every year has been basically the worst hitter in all of baseball, and yet he's a great pitch framer. Whatever, he's one of the best defensive catchers, and that's why. Like, we have our version. Like, Cody Bellinger is Austin Hedges, and so like he is as bad as Austin Hedges is offensively right now. Over the entire course of this season. And so to me, I get the defensive piece. I guess what's so fascinating is to see how people weight those. Because yes, Matt Beatty is, I don't know. I mean, I would say average to maybe slightly below average as a defender, whereas Cody Bellinger is like plus. But we're talking about a guy who then, would you rather have like an average defensive outfielder and an average offensive guy, or a 10 out of 10 on defense and a 2 out of 10 on offense? And that's where the Dodgers are. And I hear you. Look, Matt Beatty, Cody Bellinger, that's not going to be the difference. But when everybody is slumping the way that they're slumping right now, it feels like those differences are magnified. When you get the bases loaded and then you get to go through Chris Taylor, Cody Bellinger, and Max Scherzer at the 7, 8, 9 spot, if one of those guys can just work a competitive at bat, and I've talked previously, I won't belabor it here, but it's simple things like productive outs. Like even the fact that Beatty only strikes out 18% of the time and is walking 9% of the time. Cody Bellinger is striking out almost 30% of the time and walking literally 1% of the time. He went 60 at bats between walks up until 2 days ago. Those are the pieces to me. So again, I'm not a Beatty guy, but I look at the numbers. To me, I would ditch Bellinger and I would go with Beatty and I would try and figure it out. I know I'm taking a hit defensively, but I just think that the gap between the defense is much smaller than the gap between the offense, at least what I'm seeing. And I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not saying this is like clear in a way, the right way. But for me, when I look at it, I'm like, man, if I could get 108 weighted runs created from Matt Beatty, which I don't think that's unrealistic. Like, I think historically, this is about where he's been. He's going to be an on-base guy with very little power. He's going to not strike out a ton, and he's going to walk a little bit. I'll take that and accept that I'm getting league average defense versus Bellinger just swinging through. He can't, I mean, there's no hope of a sacrifice fly. There's no hope of a productive ground out. It's infield flies and strikeouts, it feels like to me.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I don't think there's a right answer here. Yeah. And I do like the point you make about, weighting, the guy who can give you decent offense, average, maybe slightly below average defense versus the plus defender with anemic offense. Yeah. And I think in a neutral context scenario, I would pick the guy with slightly above average offense, slightly above average defense over the plus defender with no offense. But in this scenario where whoever it is hitting 8th in a Dodgers lineup and where the only non-all-star is Will Smith, who's the best catcher in baseball.
Yeah, he's probably the second best guy in the lineup.
Exactly. So with that context, I'm more okay with, just taking whatever you can get from Bellinger and knowing that the outfield defense at all 3 positions is going to be really good. And, it's not like Chris Taylor's a bad defender in center. Cody Bellinger is just an elite defender.
Yeah, and it's fair, right? I think it's a difference of perspective of you're saying, hey, the Dodgers are only going to win if 1 through 7 start to hit. And if 1 through 7 start to hit, then give me the plus defender in center field and the guy who's just going to be basically an automatic out. Whereas I'm looking at it and saying 1 through 7 currently aren't hitting, and I hate watching this. So give me a guy in the 8 hole who's at least going to give me productive at-bats, who's at least going to draw a walk every once in a while and not strike out consistently. And as you said, there's not a right or wrong answer. So folks that are watching, let us know what you think below. As we said, Steven Souza Jr. added to the 40-man roster, called up to the major league level. Zack McKinstry sent down. The rest of these guys at the minor league level. So what would you do? Is Billy McKinney the guy? Do you believe in the long term, the defensive Billy McKinney with the Bellinger level offense that you're getting from him? Or would you go with a guy like Matt Beatty? Would you go with Luke Raley if he comes off the COVID list or the injured list in time? What would you do? So, Justin, we appreciate your time. Nick, check out his stuff at Future Dodgers on Twitter, futuredodgers.com for all of his stuff. My name is Jeff Spiegel. We appreciate you joining us. Daniel and I are going to be going live on Thursday night. That's a 10 a.m. game that day, so we will not be doing a live post game at like 1 in the afternoon. We'll probably do a live show Thursday night afterwards, so be sure to join us in that. Check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 everywhere you go for social media. Justin, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.